Peter. I've made the observation several times this week. These quarterbacks, I think they got together and they came up with a schedule as to which day of the week they would take over the news cycle, because every day it's another quarterback or two, and now front and center it's Russell Wilson. Again.
Yeah. Mike, if you look at the absolute end game of this, I'm probably a naive guy, but I still think there will be peace in our time, and Russell Wilson will start the season as the quarterback of the Seahawks. But as we continue to go down this road, you continue to pick at this scab, and I just continue to think back to the last time I saw video of Russell Wilson. He was in Roger Goodell's box at the Super Bowl looking absolutely miserable. And miserable. I mean,
I'm not laughing at his misery. I'm laughing because, yeah, he was miserable.
And I think part of that is I'm at the Super Bowl. I never play in it anymore. And here comes 43-year-old Tom Brady parachuting into a brand new team. And I am watching Tom Brady. Are you kidding me? The man who torments my dreams. And look, I just think this is about Russell Wilson, obviously, is totally unhappy with the situation in Seattle. If you're the Seahawks, you can do one of two things right now. You can say, well, this is not how we do things here. We don't allow our players to tell us what to do. Or you could say, if we trade Russell Wilson, yeah, it'll be a lot more peaceful around here, but it'll also be 6-10. So in my opinion, I think the Seahawks are probably going to say, listen, let's let this thing settle down. Let's let it calm down. And then let's have all families come to the table, okay? All families come to the table and everybody just state what their issues are, and let's get over them right now. And let's fix them right now. Don't just say, hey, Russell, you go sit in a corner and play. It's obviously, if that happens, this is just going to surface again.
Well, and I think that we are back to Russell Wilson as the A topic in the NFL because of past instances where Russell Wilson has tried to exert some power and some control over the situation in Seattle, and they have told him, go sit in a corner. And yesterday's events happened not by accident. The story from The Athletic that represented to me the first time the Seahawks spoke their mind on this matter, even though it was all done through anonymous quotes given to the various writers whose names appear on this story. We started to see pushback against Russell. We got the story of Russell Wilson after 7 turnovers in back-to-back losses to the Bills and the Rams, going in to meet with the coaches on a short week preparation session for a Thursday night game against the Cardinals with all sorts of ideas, Peter, for fixing the offense. And he was basically told, we've got this, and he stormed out of the room. Russell Wilson's storming out of the room. That doesn't mesh with the image that we've had of Russell Wilson for the last 9 years, but that gets put out there. There are other things in that article that are unflattering about Wilson, and let's start with that, Peter, because my takeaway when I got to the end of that article, and it took some work. These long articles, I feel like you should get a T-shirt if you read all of them. But when I got to the end of it, I said, you know what? If the Seahawks don't view Russell Wilson the way that Russell Wilson views Russell Wilson, why in the hell don't they just throw the doors open and let some other team that would view him that way give more for Wilson than what the Seahawks apparently think he's worth?
I think the answer to that is very, very simple. They know that when they go to training camp every year, they are going to be a playoff team with Russell Wilson. Facts, history, everything points to that. He's been on the team for 9 years. He has started every game since he was the 75th overall pick in 2012. And he, has led the team to the playoffs, 7 of 9 years. They've been to 2 Super Bowls. without Russell Wilson, you head into this murky world of who knows? No one has any idea what happens if they let him go. And all you can say, no matter how unhappy you are with each other, the fact is, this is an organization that held on to Marshawn Lynch year after year for at least 2 years longer than I think people inside the organization really wanted to hold on to him, because they knew that he was popular in the locker room. Fans absolutely loved him. And, he was still producing some good things on the field. So they took all of his nonsense. If you hang on to Marshawn Lynch for as miserable, speaking of miserable, as he made people like John Schneider and Pete Carroll, are you telling me you're not going to hold on to somebody who's 3 times as important to the bottom line of this organization? I don't think so.
But if there's a team out there that would make Russell Wilson their Patrick Mahomes, setting aside for now the question of whether or not Wilson would thrive as the player through whom the offense runs, because he did thrive that way initially in 2020, but then defenses caught up and they didn't properly pivot to other things, and that's where I think it all kind of fell apart in that meeting leading up to the Cardinals game. But if you do have a team that says, this is Mahomes, this is the guy we build the offense around, it's not a defense with a running game and an explosive play-action pass from time to time, this is the guy that we make the centerpiece of our entire franchise, wouldn't that team view that player as being worth more in draft capital, players, etc., than the Seahawks would? I'm just talking about what does it take to tip the balance. And to me, if they view him as a guy that, okay, he thinks more of himself than we think of him, but he's good enough to get us to the playoffs every year, so we're not letting him go. I just think if there's another team out there that views him as another Mahomes, they'll offer enough to get the Seahawks to say, well, maybe we'll find another guy that'll get us to the playoffs every year with all these draft picks and all this other stuff we're getting for this guy that we don't regard as a Patrick Mahomes.
Did you hear the word you just said in that sentence? It was maybe. And so the only way that if I'm the Seahawks, the only way that I would consider doing this is if it is one of the teams on his list that has a quarterback who would trade you that quarterback, and that quarterback, in your opinion, is 85 to 90% of Russell Wilson. That's the only way I would consider doing it, unless things get truly nuclear. Okay, who's on that list that you could see that? Derek Carr? Maybe. Dak Prescott? Maybe. And so those are the things, that's the only way I'd consider this, Mike. The absolutely only way. And again, I'm saying until I'm forced to standing on the edge of the cliff and I have to make a choice. Until that point, I want to fix this. And I want everybody to get in a room and yell at each other for a day and a half. And then let's see if it can be fixed. Because, Mike, at the end of the day, I can tell you that if the Seahawks trade Russell Wilson and the next 2 years they go 7-9 and 6-10, then they have failed mightily, and they have failed this franchise as stewards of the franchise to keep things right.
Well, I don't disagree with that, because they do have a guy, and this reminds me of the Texans situation in one very specific way. There are many, many differences between Deshaun Watson's discontent in Houston and Russell Wilson's discontent in Seattle. I think there are far more differences than there are similarities. But there's one very important similarity. How did you let it get to this point? How? When you have a franchise quarterback, how have you managed through this falling of the dominoes? For the Texans, it happened fairly quickly. For the Seahawks, it's something that's been simmering, but it's still got to the same point where we have, Peter, something that I can't really recall, and I've been covering this sport carefully for 20 years now. This is a new phenomenon when you have a franchise quarterback, short list franchise quarterback, who, number one, is unhappy with his team, and number two, even though they were doing it in different ways, is willing to make that displeasure known to the point where it's clear they want out. Now, it's more clear Deshaun Watson wants out, but I also think it's clear Russell Wilson wants out, and we'll talk about why I think that coming up. But that isn't that odd that the Seahawks, for everything they've done right, the mere fact that this problem exists represents a failure.
Obviously, it just means that that they either overlooked some signals or this became volcanic very late in this particular year. I have a much bigger problem, by the way, with the Deshaun Watson one, Mike, because, 4 months before you start hearing he wants out, or 4.5 months, basically he makes, over that 4-month period, $28.1 million. And he has a very happy, tearful, emotional press conference. And, so I'm a little dubious about this. Oh, he's been treated so poorly in Houston. I mean, you seem pretty darn happy 4 months before that. And if you had one instance of a guy lying to you. Yeah, okay. But I'm dubious about Watson, let's just say. But when we talk about Russell Wilson, we'll talk about it. But when we talk about Russell Wilson, the one thing that sort of bothers me just about this is the long-term aspect of it. This didn't boil up in the span of 4 months. This has been growing. You can just tell. And right now, that's why I think this has to be addressed. And this doesn't get addressed over Zoom. This gets addressed in a big room with 4 or 5 people in it, and that's it. Socially distanced and all that. But you have got to get together and try to solve this before the thing blows up in your face.
And the Seahawks didn't come out of that article yesterday from The Athletic unscathed. One of the points that was made is a point that's been ricocheting around the NFL ever since Russell Wilson went on Dan Patrick's show right after the Super Bowl and said things that made us all say, holy crap, what's going on in Seattle? The idea that Pete Carroll doesn't have anyone there to tell him no, that Pete Carroll is in charge, that Pete Carroll runs the show. There's not even an owner there to tell him no. Jody Allen is not involved with that team. Urban Meyer found out a couple of weeks ago in Jacksonville, it's not like Ohio State, it's not like Florida. There is someone there who is a multi-billionaire who can tell you no if things get off the rails. Pete Carroll doesn't even have that. And so this is going to be his call, I believe. Is he going to relent? Is he going to give in? Is he going to see the light? And if he doesn't, I don't see this happening. I agree with you. Now, I still think there's a shelf life. As I said yesterday, the shelf life for Russell Wilson and the Seahawks is closer to bread than bricks right now. This is something that is going to end, I think, 3 years absolute max. 2 years is the more likely outer limit. Next year, unless they win a Super Bowl, is going to be the year when things happen and he moves on. And I think if the Seahawks get to the point where they realize it's inevitable, that's the other side of this coin, Peter. Once you know it's inevitable, if you come to that conclusion, because I think from Russell Wilson's perspective, it's inevitable. And he's not going to stop. And he's going to keep jostling. And he's going to say all the right things when it's time to show up and work. He's not going to hold out. He's not going to refuse to play for the Seahawks, but he's going to keep jostling, and he believes it's inevitable he'll be gone. He's under contract 3 more years. Once the Seahawks come to that conclusion, why not? Why not, if there's a great offer sitting on the table, why not? And they may think, you know what, let's kick the can for a year because then somebody will spend a whole year plotting their best possible offer, and we'll get more next year, and we'll have more of a chance to plan for this. But I think once they know it's inevitable, that's when you have to start coming up with your exit strategy for Russell Wilson.
Why are you positive it can't be fixed?
I just think that any relationship between franchise quarterback and team that gets to this point is not going to have some sort of lightning bolt, 5 families meet. Because you've consistently resisted and refused to do whatever it is that he wants you to do, and he's gotten to the point where he's crossed the Rubicon. Football coaches aren't wired to admit that they were wrong. They're not wired to say, I'll give in and I'll do it the way you want it to be done. Sorry, I've been resistant and reluctant for the past 5 years. Now, we have seen guys like Tom Coughlin undergo an organic personality change when his job was riding on it in 2007. But I don't see Pete Carroll, as he's closing in on 70, rolling out of bed one day and saying, you know what? Russell's been right all along. The offense is going to run through him, and we're going to throw the ball 45 times a game, and it's going to be the Russell Wilson show plus whatever we can get out of the other 21 guys around him. I just don't think Pete Carroll's going to wake up one day and come to that conclusion. And if it takes the proverbial gun to the head that Russell Wilson is holding to the Seahawks at this point to get him to do it, that's not the ideal way to do it.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, Mike, but I also would ask this question, and I think we both know the answer. Okay, so Pete Carroll turned 70 years old this year, and I guess if Russell Wilson is dispatched somewhere, let's just say, then what the organization has done is they have chosen a 70-year-old coach with who knows how much shelf life he has left. They have chosen a 70-year-old coach over a 32-year-old quarterback who says that, like Brady, he wants to play into his 40s. The way that Russell Wilson takes care of himself and conditions himself and all that, I would guess that he has 10 years left of playing. But let's just say it's 8. Let's say it's 8. Let's say his career right now is at the halfway point. All right? So, he's played 9. Let's just say he's got 8 left. All right? So, do you think it's smart to choose a 70-year-old coach over a 32-year-old quarterback who has led his team to the playoffs virtually every year since he's been in the NFL? I mean, that is the big question. And you know what? In Seattle, there's no one to make that decision except the 70-year-old coach. Right. So, I mean, it's kind of a Rubik's Cube, because the only person I think who can step in is Jody Allen. Jody Allen would barely know Russell Wilson if she met him on the sidewalk. She doesn't have any relationship with Russell Wilson. So you can't envision Jody Wilson, who is as reclusive, I hear, as her late brother. If you love the Seattle Seahawks, you've got to be worried about where this story is right now.
Well, and there's a belief out there that the Seahawks management right now is the closest thing, other than in Green Bay, to a corporate ownership situation where Vulcan, the group that Paul Allen put together, is really managing the team, and Jody Allen is just the name on paper, which puts even more power in the hands of Pete Carroll. I'll tell you a story about Pete Carroll. It's been 3-4 years ago at the league meetings. We had Robert Kraft on the show, and I asked him how long he would envision Bill Belichick staying with the team, how deep into his own life cycle Bill Belichick stays. And Robert Kraft talked about Warren Buffett and Rupert Murdoch and other titans of industry who work well into their 80s, and he would like to see Bill Belichick do that. That same day, I posed the question to Pete Carroll, and he said, why stop there? So Carroll doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's going to see his football or other mortality staring him in the face. And if he's the one making the call, yeah, you know what? He may be thinking, I'm going to be here 10, 15 years. I'm going to be here longer than Russell Wilson's career. At least whether or not that happens, he's thinking that, and that's going to be a factor in how he resolves this. Look, something's gone wrong, and it's gone wrong over an extended period of time. This is not a new sentiment. I've been talking about it for a while, and it always drove Seahawks fans crazy. Every time I'd hear something about Russell Wilson's discontent, one of the first teams I'd hear about is the Cowboys. That drives people crazy too, and here we are.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.